Hello and welcome to my thoughts on Once Upon a Time episodes 8 to 10. After this I will be doing my thoughts after each episode for those people that watch the very shortened version of my reactions. They will be about 2 episodes behind the reactions to give people time to comment. Right, let's get on with it. So we start with Desperate Souls and Rumpelstiltskin's story, one that I have been looking forward to, and it did not disappoint. Purple RD mentioned the scene in the forest where the guard forces Rumple to kiss his boots as being one that is rather heartbreaking, and I have to agree. The writers did everything they could in this scene to make sure that there was a very strong empathy between the viewer and Rumpelstiltskin. I mean, it's bad enough to see somebody in a position of power bully somebody else, let alone have that victim be a crippled man in front of his son. This episode also opened up another interesting thread, which is that because Rumpelstiltskin's story was set so far in the past, they mentioned the Ogre Wars, that children were being recruited into the army to fight in the Ogre Wars, and inference was made that these Ogre Wars have been raging for quite some time, even at this point. And that is a thread that I would like to, I'd like to see explored. That sounds very interesting, how that started and the consequences of that. I'm sure we will at some point, but yeah, I like that idea. In the now time, Emma is up for the job as full-time sheriff after Graham's death/murder, and Mr. Gold gets involved in the most brutal of ways. Mr. Gold is a very interesting character. He's a very grey character morally. I haven't figured him out yet. I don't think I'm meant to be quite honest. I mean, he knows about the kind of war that's starting to rage between Emma and Regina, yet he's quite happy to take either side whenever it suits him. He's very, very mercenary, and looking back at the past and seeing what happened to him and his background, I can kind of see how he became that way. And now, of course, Rumple has defeated the old Dark Lord and become the new Dark Lord, and with it comes a truly terrifyingly awesome power. I am not entirely sure yet whether Rumple's character changed because of the power, or whether his character was always going to change into a very mercenary person and the power just gave him the opportunity to be even more devious and powerful. I don't know where that's going yet, but it was really good to see Robert Carlyle really flexing his acting muscles in this episode. In episode 9, True North, we have Hansel and Gretel's story, and we see the past and the present being mirrored in a much more obvious way than we've seen so far. Again, it was the Once Upon a Time, the fairy tale part of the story that I was most interested in. Well, the storybook part of the plot was a very beautiful story of 2 orphan children finding their father. It didn't really seem to have a lot to do with all the other things that are going on in storybook at the time. It just seemed a little bit forced, and for that I didn't really enjoy this part of that episode. I was much more interested in the Hansel and Gretel story, which I've known from childhood. It is one of the few fairy stories that I do know, and it was interesting to see the writer's interpretation of that story and how it all fits in with the evil queen. But I mean, truly, the high point of this episode had to be Emma Caulfield as the Blind Witch. I mean, the Blind Witch was a truly terrifying character. And of course, kudos also to the actors that played Hansel and Gretel, Nicholas and Ava. That was Carly, Scott Collins and Quinn Lord, so well done to them. They played the roles with amazing believability. On the whole, not my favourite episode so far. In 7:15 AM, we are back to Snow White's story again, and her war with the evil queen. In the past, Snow White is still on the run, living in the woods after her first meeting with Prince James. In the present, Mary Margaret is kind of stalking David. That can't go well. We also get to meet Red Riding Hood for the first time, officially for the first time, which was fantastic. I don't know why, but I've been really looking forward to seeing Red Riding Hood's story, and now that she's been introduced, I'm hoping that her story won't be too far behind. Purple RD again asked me why I didn't include any of the scenes with the dove in my cut down version. And the truth of the matter is, while it was nice to see that the dove that Prince James used to communicate with Snow White was represented in the present, I don't really see as it had anything to do with anything, to be quite honest. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe that's going to have repercussions later, but I didn't really react to it and I didn't really find it that interesting, to be quite honest. I was more interested in finding out the identity of the stranger, and that I've got to admit that the scene with Emma and the stranger in the diner has got to be one of my favourites of the episode. We also get to meet the eight dwarves. The 8 dwarves. Okay, Stealthy didn't last very long. Loved the idea of there once was 8 dwarves, now there's only 7. Didn't particularly like the name that they came up with, Stealthy. Nah. silly name. But then again, as silly as Grumpy, who, by the way, was a standout character in 7:15 AM. Grumpy, he just became one of my favourites right from the moment we saw him. Played brilliantly by Lee Arenberg, and hopefully we're going to get to see some of Snow White's time with the dwarves. But at least it brings us sort of full circle. We know where we are, where it fits in now. We've sort of caught up with ourselves in the past. In the present, it ends with David and Mary Margaret kissing. That's witnessed by the mayor, so there's going to be trouble there. But on the whole, I think David and Mary Margaret's story, or their on-off romance, is starting to bore me. On the whole, I thought this was a brilliant episode for the Once Upon a Time fairy tale story part of it. The storybook part didn't really interest me. And that is my views on episodes 8 to 10. Next up, episode 11, which will probably coincide with my reaction to episode 13. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye bye.